room and those on the screen. I'm going to just sort of, how many have we got on the screen? Online?
2.
2. So it's not a lot. Now people are always scared of the interactive part where they might be, I shouldn't have explained what we're going to do this afternoon, and then they would all come. And then they would have been caught, have to do it. So why don't we just work through this as a whole group, because there are so few of you that I think we can manage that. Do you want to kind of come in a little, why don't we kind of make it more of a circle and sort of talk through how we might. It's actually what I'm like, so because I think you raised, so I'm just going to kind of say to the people that might still be online and those others who can hear our conversation. This isn't really, it's taking the next step from something that's kind of just an issue that you have that you're dealing with, and that next step of that's a research question. And how do I go about doing that research? I actually think if I move, here it is. If I move along, I just want to, where I was going, this kind of comes back to when I was putting this together, I was kind of hunting around for other resources that yes, and I came across this book, Researching Your Own Practice, and by John Mason. He calls it The Discipline of Noticing. And I think critical to that whole thing, if you take that, we have an expression called grit under the saddle. So what is it, like if you have grit under the saddle, eventually it's going to hurt the horse or whatever, but it's just that, or the pea under the mattress, or the princess can't sleep, or, those kinds of ideas of a minor irritant that over time becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. But how do you kind of get that into the research space? And I think this is this idea of noticing. It's all about self-awareness and reflection. So, I mean, we all talk about reflectors, but if we can put that in the context of, if I know myself and if I'm aware of what I'm doing and the impact it has on others around me, and I can start to think, well, what is it? I notice that a lot of people didn't come this afternoon, that were here this morning. I could, in a kind of self-aware way, say, why is that? 3 hours in a busy academic life is a huge commitment. That would be one thing. Second thing is people may have had other commitments this afternoon that they would have liked to come and participate, but it didn't suit it. It could be that what I did this morning suggested to them, oh, there's really nothing here for me. It's, I don't need this, I don't need to spend another hour of my life doing this. In a self kind of aware way, I can kind of think out, not just taking it all on myself. It's like, oh, I'm a failure. Nobody can make it after and worry about that. Or I can kind of think about what was going on in the environment, what could have been done differently. We'll.
Sorry.
No. We decided there were so few people who came back that we were just, that we were just so I kind of just jumped over because we started off the conversation before we officially started this afternoon. That was around you have this thing that's going on in your teaching and learning, and maybe an external community, something that's going on that's outside of control, or whatever. But how does that become a research? So it's sort of like the same. So the first step is this idea of when you research your own practice, and at this point we're not talking, although I did this in relation to thinking about discipline practice, you can equally apply it to the practice of teaching and learning. Right? So that is the first thing, is to be aware of what's going on. So you can sort of think about those moments. So with the lease and studying this whole thing that had the two layers. Come in. Why don't you come here and why don't you go over next to Gates?
Thank you.
You can take the same thing. You can take the same thing and end up with very different research questions because of what interests you or who you talk to about it. So for Alex, she became interested in design decisions that instruct us. You say it's all about the, quality and it's about impact on students and, researching students and so on. What about the teaching part of it? Sort of like, so that's, for her, that was the design choices that teachers make when they're trying to introduce technology into their teaching practice. So this is actually the blurb. I just liked this quote. It was actually just in the Amazon blurb for the book. One must be attuned to fresh possibilities when they are needed and be alert to such a need through awareness of what is happening at any given time. That's where the questions come from. And it's that kind of identification of an issue, a problem, something bubbling there, that through that community of scholars, through trying to articulate what it is, that the questions start to formulate. So it's always a spiral that goes up, and then you start to question, well, what have other people said about this? So I have this kind of when I was teaching research methods to undergraduate students, I found, and I found it equally, so I now have 32, I think, PhD completions. So I found it just as useful talking to PhD students as to those undergraduate students. And you break down what is a piece of research. And I say it's 5 questions that you want to answer in terms of communicating research. 5 questions. That's all it is. It doesn't matter whether it's a simple project in your classroom where you're kind of thinking about how you can improve a particular practice or a particular outcome, or your engagement with the community, or whatever from that practical thing, or whether it's a PhD thesis, or whether it's a Nobel Prize winning, sort of big thing like that. And the 5 questions are put simply. That's all they are. 5 simple questions. Number 1, what is the problem? And so this is when I work with PhD students. It's often the hardest thing for them to understand is they kind of come with a method or they come with something else that they've read or picked up somewhere, but they haven't problematized it. You know, I want to look at the implementation of blended learning in my classroom. Well, what's the problem? It's like, because that's what research is. Research is about finding a solution to a problem. So you have to identify the problem. And that's kind of question number 1. What is the problem? Number 2, what have other people said or done about this problem? Well, so that's where you've got to look at what other research has been done. What does the literature say? Are there theories about why this might be the case? There might be student resistance to blended learning, or now that they've experienced blended learning, they don't want to come back to campus. Or now that they've experienced blended learning, they don't want to learn online ever again, and they only want to come back to campus. Or they have, they're not as engaged. The teacher satisfaction levels in the online classes may have dropped, so teachers may be worried about that. And it's sort of like, okay, so I'm a teacher. My students didn't like my blended learning, or my online learning, I should say, not blended learning. They didn't like my online learning. Their satisfaction has gone down. Now I think I'm a terrible teacher. That's a problem for me, but it's not a researchable problem here, is it? Because to understand that, I have to understand what research is already saying. What do we know about student engagement with online learning? And what are the clues in that? That helps you start to, that reading is necessary to help you. So you kind of have your nut of the problem area, and it's very murky. And reading the literature helps you to kind of come out of that murk and start to refine what the problem actually is, and that leads to your research question. So, so that's number 2. What have other people said about this problem? Number 3 is, what have those heard about the problem? So this is about your research design. What methods did you use to investigate this problem because of the question you've developed? And that's, I always say to my students, in terms of writing a PhD, you write chapter 1 last, right? You write chapter 3 first. You write a draft of chapter 2, which will change after you've written chapter 3. It's chapter 2 in literature. Of course, PhD thesis rarely are 5 chapters, but kind of the structure, the argument is still the same. So you update when you've got your data and you've done your findings chapter. Right? You always update your literature review, your chapter 2 at that time, because you need that for your discussion. And you need that more up-to-date thinking, and you have a chance for the findings to be rolling around in your head. So question number 4 is, what did I find? And question 5 is, what does it mean? So that's where you kind of think about, well, what does it mean in terms of an answer to my problem? But generally, as we know, answers to problems actually just create more questions. There are always limitations with any piece of research, so that's kind of takes that mindset. And look, I think it's so I designed designed that structure to help undergraduate students understand the research process, and obviously then you go into more detail about all of those things, but to give them something, a shape that they can kind of attach things to, in a sense. And then one of my colleagues had encountered it, and he was doing his PhD, and he said that was one of the most helpful, just finding that structure that was that one of his honours students came to him as his, oh, I've got the structure from Wilma, and he's, I'm doing my PhD, this structure is really good. So that's not kind of banging my own pocket. I'm trying to say that if we understand that kind of piece, we see how important that first question is, the problem, and how you kind of need to keep circling it to just nail that. So that comes from that awareness thing. So that's what this is all later on in the and that's practice loop research. So that's where I was going, but we're not going to have time for it. So we're going back to this. So let's have some of your issues, some of your teaching and learning issues. Yes, please.
I know something about, because it was a lot of this, the leader of such research, practice-based research, and anything about that. How do you go about doing research practice-based?
Yes. So that was the third piece of this, and that's the piece that I think we're not going to get a chance to do. But I will say a couple of things, because you've asked the question, and I believe in answering questions where they are. In my work, we call that when students learn, or the people we're working with learn at the point of need. So when they ask questions, when they need the answer, even if you can't give a straight answer. I have to my going back to answer the questions. One of the things that came up one time about I was third year in these maths lectures, I've always asked questions, but I encourage the students when I'm doing a maths lecture to ask questions. And got to a particular point, does anybody have any questions? I'm really surprised you don't have any questions. You know, so it's like, one of the students piped up. Wilma, we probably have questions, but we don't like asking them. I said, I won't judge you on the basis of that. And questions are good. If you have that question, probably half the class has that question. Questions are good. It's like, no, it's not about how you might judge us. It's just it takes so long to answer. It's like, so coming back to that idea, I think particularly in creative endeavours, you have two components. Right? And so if you're doing a doctorate in creative arts, you have two components. You have the creative component, which is the actual having a problem that's kind of a creative. It's not problem in the same sense as we might talk about it, you know, curing cancer or, you know, any of those other things. But it is a problem that's about wanting to explore an issue or an idea or something that's sort of like, and it is a problematization, because otherwise why would you spend time trying, you know, artists don't just kind of take that thing, that's like some slack. They want to capture light, or, you know, they have problems that they're trying to solve in their creative work. So there is that element that creative output is research. It is. So universities struggle with that because it's so, everything's so metrically standard. Yep. But there's a real groundswell coming through now, and I've got some of that in the presentation. So in the follow-up online things that we'll organise, we'll explore some of these things. So there's a book that's just come out called Doing Rebellious Research. And this is trying to shift the academy, the university, to understand that it's not just about the exegesis component, but it's, you know, so that it's actually, there are techniques that we have in our creative practice that can actually be applied to communicate research in more traditional disciplines. So I think, I can't remember who, oh yes, I think it was Martha Graham, who was a contemporary dancer. It really changed modern dance. She was an American. And she said, if something along the lines of, if you could dance what you just said to me, then I would understand. So it's, you know, that's what rebellious research is, you know, a group of people that are trying to say that the research, you know, the creative output is a form of research. However, there is this exegesis component, which I don't know whether everybody's familiar with how those things work. With a doctorate of creative arts, you have a creative product, and then you have the exegesis, which is your analysis of the problem and how you went about solving it and kind of presenting it and so on. So it's a kind of a deep dive analysis of the creative process and product, its meaning, and so on. And then there are traditional outputs that creative people have often of, I don't know, like a new technique that they've applied and reflection on that, whatever. So there's that kind of range. So there is one creative research, creative output as a research can stop. Then there is two, the other element is the techniques of the creative endeavour that can be used to communicate more effectively. Because you know, all of the journal articles that people write, you know, got a couple hundred, and so on. How many get read? How many get read, and by how many people? You know, it's a minuscule. It doesn't impact. So things like Sarah's presentation, the Big Idea Festival, you know, in a sense, what they're trying to do, let's not do a guest lecture of somebody presenting, you know, professors presenting their research and they take 2 hours to explain, you know, how they split the molecule or something else, and so on. Let's give them a maximum of 10 minutes and they have to communicate a big idea. So that's the thinking behind that. New professors were invited to be part of that Big Ideas Festival, and so on. But still, it's still limited. So rebellious research is all about, you know, the other technologies that we can be using. So our new Vice Chancellor is a mad tweeter. She's on Twitter. She's tweeting all the time, right? As you know, she's sitting in, I sit in board meetings with her, a couple of computer spots down. You know, she's got the Twitter open, and she's tweeting away through the meeting. She tweeted, you know, when she was here recently for the opening of Vatican I and other meetings and so on, tweeting all the time. And she's the first Vice Chancellor that has actually employed somebody specifically to kind of help manage her social communication. She sends an email to staff every Friday. every single Friday she writes an email to send to all staff. So, but, you know, it's music, you know, music, it's film, you know, it's kind of bites, the 3-minute thesis competition, you know, is a kind of a different format to try and communicate your research idea and different outlets. So that's the second component of practice levels. So that's two things that we're kind of, it's going to take us a while to get the academy to keep moving in the direction to fully honour. I think the University of Wollongong's made great progress in this area. I know there are people that, so you don't have to have a Nobel Prize winning or a Pulitzer Prize winning or a, you know, whatever piece of creative output in order to get promoted. It's kind of finding that balance a little bit. Anyway, so other, so we're going to run out of the hour before we have to get to this, but maybe we can kind of keep picking it up through, you know, if we just had a kind of, if we established, I don't know, with people, we could sort of pick a time that works for people. We can have a teaching and, you know, sort of a research, just keep these conversations going through a circle, online circle, so people can come or not come or whatever, we can record them through WebEx or whatever, so upload them somewhere.
That's a very interesting idea. I think we could actually start at that platform and just get the discussion going.
Yeah. So I can, so what I'll do, I talk to some of our creative arts people, and unfortunately because of the whole COVID thing, between, you know, making this arrangement with Blue, there wasn't enough time to get them to actually do a specific recording where they talk about that. But I will, I'm chasing them up. I call in my favourites, and I can just get them to drop in for a Q&A session where they can, you know, just talk for 5-10 minutes about the research and how they go about it and how that kind of gets recognised. And so on, and have Q&A. So, but also you'll see in the PowerPoint, because I'll give that to Lou and he can certify it on whatever to participants. You can see in that there are some references to some, you'll coordinate, you'll work it out. I'll send it to you both. Okay, so let's go back to some teaching and learning questions. Teaching and learning practice.
Challenges are not the teaching and learning practices. They are the other work-related requirements, either in the teaching and learning. I believe most of us, when we join this career, we enjoy the teaching and learning, and those are the things that drive us and give you joy, and we really enjoy. It is the paperwork, the administrative work, the all other work, either than the teaching and learning that keeps us up at night. Yeah.
So, as was in class basic, it was joy. When it comes to online, it's a bit of different scenario for the text.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah, I think technology too has, in a sense, made student expectation about your availability is different.
Like independent learning.
It is, yeah.
As the, you know, sort of, if they have to physically come to your office, make an appointment to come to the office and talk to you about something, it's like they don't expect an instant answer. But if they send you an email at 11 o'clock at night, they send you a reminder at 6 o'clock in the morning, if you haven't got another awake at 6 o'clock in the morning, but, you know, did you see, you know, sometimes it's an hour later, did you see my email? It's like, yes, I did actually, but I'm not answering it until I wake up. So, yeah, I think those kinds of issues, but what's the answer to that? I don't really know the answer to that. I'm gonna use that though as that's the annoying part. That I call that the white handing time. So this is about how you structure your day. Stuff that white hands you. You know, that's just you don't need a lot of brain power for it. It's tedious, and so on. So you want to be doing that when your brain's dead, right? So if you identify that you think best and operate best first thing in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, or you're an early riser, get up at 5, go for a run before the sun comes up and kind of burns the chili off your brow. You might be, you know, really alert and ready to fire on cylinders in terms of output early in the morning. That is when you do not want to be white-handing, right? So on that kind of white-hand stuff. So I think because my PhD research involves a collaboration with Howard Gardner's Project Spectrum. Did a lot of work with the people at Harvard. I was based in the US at that point. And I was driving in fact to the airport one time and was talking about how prolific he is in terms of his writing, but also Robert Sternberg, you know, probably, you know, in my field, so probably haven't encountered Robert Sternberg. Robert Sternberg is an educational psychologist as well and would have the biggest output. You know, books, like hundreds of books, thousands of journal articles. Obviously, PhD students play a big part in that because they write a lot of it. But nevertheless, you know, there is the academic approach. And I said, well, how do you do it? How do you, you know, I'm studying my PhD. How do you produce so much? And he has a rule. Now, his rule is that no matter where he is and what he's doing, he writes for an hour every day. So what he does is, these are the things that I have to do in this day. Then this is where I'm going to have to put my hour. I mean, I get up at 4 o'clock and do my hour. You know, that's more efficient. And so if you did that, let's say you give yourselves the weekend off. Let's say you only do that 5 days a week. That 5 hours is more productive than a 5-hour block. Why? Because a 5-hour block means you're doing it once a week. Or a 10-hour block once a fortnight. Even worse, because you spend a good period of time at the beginning of those 5 hours getting your head back into space of what you're working on. Right? Whereas if you do that 1 hour, you could actually leave something in the middle of a sentence. You leave that file open on your computer. When you turn your computer on for your hour next day, you don't have to read anything. You go back to where you were and you keep going. It's like it's efficient. Some people have another version of that, which is a number of words. 250 new words per day. Think about that. If you can't go to bed at night until you have written 250 new words on a piece of research that you're doing, 250 words doesn't take very long to actually write the words. The other work behind writing the 250 words is another matter. But this is about scheduling the time to do those tasks when your head is most there, or recognising that you're not going to be able to do that every day, but you're still going to build it in to a particular point, and not allowing the white thinking to get away. So where do you put the white thinking? When you're tired, when you've got 20 minutes between that meeting and that meeting, you attend to that task because you can't do anything else meaningful in that 20 minutes or whatever, and so on. So kind of work on it that way. So scheduling, I think, and working out when you work best and get your most important thinking tasks scheduled wherever you can for that period of time. That's what I'd recommend. So I know that that's the frustration as well. In terms of, and we've got to think about what is the technology, what is the automation that might help. I think we have tried to go paperless as much as possible. It's frustrating to me still, some of our systems, like so our human research ethics page, template or whatever, is very time consuming because it is not intuitive. You have to kind of go over there, then you come back, then you have to find that. Just awful, awful. So our QA process for offshore, when I was an associate dean international before I came into this role, I said we're not using the QAMS system, quality assurance management system that they set up because it took too long. Academics didn't do it. They wouldn't do it properly. They wouldn't do the QA properly because the system that they had to do it, we did it manually because it was quicker to do it manually than to do it through the technology system that was supposed to solve it. Solve the problem. So those kinds of things are frustrating. I understand. Is there a research question in that? Is there? What do you think?
Probably. If we a research question that we can develop from that area.
Okay, the research question, if we look at the problem is the discrepancy between optimal versus the current. Okay, so the optimal that we want is to sleep, to not keep us up at night. That is optimal. And that's what's happening. What is holding us back is the amount of the additional weight, administrative, non-valuable work that needs to be done. So how do we overcome that? Prioritize.
Yes, so your research question then starts to be, it's like you're facing this, other people are facing it, but they don't know the solution. And then you've got people that are superstars. It's like, what are they doing? What are their techniques? It's like, so what are the, so in a sense, it's kind of doing that Sarah thing, isn't it? It's not just, you know, so what's the problem, you know, so it's like, oh, you're spending 10 hours a day on administrative tasks. Okay, here's the analysis, you know, for the 50 academics reported that they spent, you know, sort of 10 hours on administrative tasks and 2 hours on teaching things, and then felt that their teaching was impacted negatively by, you know, sort of like the administration. But that's one side of it. The other side of it is that kind of, well, what do people do? How do they, you know, under the same demand regime, what are their techniques to deal with administrivia?
Probably human communication, how we can actually advance, but in the process, in terms of communication, interpersonal communication, the administrative work. I think the administrative was better, improved.
Yeah, yeah.
It might be the SOPs.
Even
Yeah,
Something which some in the process of documentation, and if it is maybe relevant or not too relevant, which we can minimize to be more effective. That can reduce the. So the process remains there, but sometimes there could be very, very young in the process.
here's this is where it's often a circular process. It's a technique, a research technique that somebody used. They're interested in how school principals spend their day, what they spend their time doing. You can ask, and the school, this is the kind of thing you're talking about. What do I actually, and you have this sense that you're spending all your time doing this administration and not enough on this one. What about school principals? They might say, oh, I spend this much time going around the school and checking the United and so on, and this much time reprimanding students who misbehave, or whatever, So, this particular piece of research, they gave school principals beakers, right? So it's too much. You can't ask the school principal to, every time he or she does something, to write down what they're doing and the amount of time that they did it for. Signing. They're not going to do it at the end of the day, and they're going to remember half the things that they did during the day because they haven't. So whenever the beeper went off, they have to write down what they were doing when the beeper went off. So it's not a kind of a diary, a snapshot of that, but over time, can you imagine the data that you have? It's like, you're not saying that's all that they do. The beeper might go off 3 times in a day at different times of the day and so on. But it gives you a sense then, with enough people and enough data, to kind of see some patterns, start to see some patterns. I wonder if there's something, that's a technique that if you sort of, it's like some kind of beeper system, like every time there's beeper. And it might be as simple of teaching. I mean, you could even have it just a ticker box so it doesn't take the time to respond. Of teaching, preparing for teaching, sort of marking, so you have a number of tasks under teaching, learning, research, governance, service, resting, eating my lunch, whatever. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. Yeah. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Very
In terms of what the academics do. Yeah.
Reminds me of the concept of scientific management by Frederick Taylor.
Yeah.
So if you look at the role, a person's role, my 8 hours, if I can break down my 8 hours and what I actually do, there are a lot of things which are very not efficient.
Yeah.
So if we want, what we can do into solving this is just a matter of discussion. Is if I break down my role, I see what I actually do and I make it efficient, take away the redundancies, then I will be better. But the effort to put in to do research and to study that will be the issue over there.
Yeah. But I think this, because this is how then, so that's kind of a simple idea, a snapshot.
Yeah.
Okay. But then you take that snapshot to people and say, oh, these are the patterns of what people are actually, how people were spending their time. So it's like, is there something that we can be doing to address this? So this is, where you want the outcome. It's, what do you want the research to do? Because you want in this case, you want the research to improve the academic life. and so on. So, but then in the process of doing that, because this is where you spiral out the mud again, there may be the trigger that then takes you down, or actually now I'm researching the question that I actually want to spend time on because I want to help all my other clients with this. So sometimes, exploring different ways of doing things. I got a feeling.
You can even do research about why is it so hard to do research. So coming up with the research idea is not that hard. With what from analysis and so everything that he said can be turned into a research. For example, we did just now, it could be that the practice of a person that makes that person has an opportunity to do research. Or is it because of the practice of the organization itself that allows the staff and the staff to research? That could be a research result, right? Even why is it so hard for UOW staff to do research? That also can be a research. Perhaps could even do research about that. And maybe compare it with other institutions that are successful in doing research.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The literature review is the one that boxes down, right?
Yeah.
So they have to have a research assistant who do that for you. And then you have to have money, finance that, and run something. Because if, I don't know how you do your effective teacher, that's not that you said as your research, effective teacher. Effective teacher.
Now,
How do you go about that?
so the effective, teachers, yeah, so I had that question. So the question was, really about trying to understand whether gifted kids compared to kids generally looked for something, what they were looking for in the teachers, what they thought made an effective teacher. I asked them, I had a forced choice thing that was kind of, that was very interesting. And it was forced choice, 36 items, and it forced them to choose between. So it's a survey is really easy, right? It's easy research initially. So how did I go about funding that? I suppose because so I had the problem. I came up with I found an existing instrument that was actually designed for university students, but it was I thought high school students could do this. Gifted high school students, no problem at all. And it's forced choice between a personal quality of their teachers and an intellectual quality. And so there were six different personal qualities, 6 different intellectual qualities. An expert is interested in us. So there were 6 of those, and there was every combination in forced choice. So you had 36 items. So they had to choose whether they preferred, so it says, I prefer a teacher who is an expert, is interested in us. Oh, which one would I like better? Oh, I like this one. Okay. So I did that initially just through some local schools, but I had an honours student. So quite often, one of the ways of getting research is supervising an honours student, and you give them your project. Right? So they do a lot of the literature review type stuff. I mean, that forms a base for you, and you keep going from there. I mean, the other thing is about literature reviews is about being smarter, not reading the whole article. You read the abstract, You read the conclusions, and then you know whether it's any use, throw it away. Actually, bad practice I discovered very early on. I had a colleague, three of us, and we were looking at the teaching of research methods. And we had the survey, and because we introduced this research method subject to undergraduates, and so we did a survey of it, and oh yeah, we've got enough data here to write something up, but we need literature reviews. So we hadn't done the literature review before we did the survey, because the survey was based on getting feedback and evaluation of whether the students appreciated the teaching of research skills in their undergraduate degree. So it's a practical teaching problem. But then, oh, now we need a literature review justification for this being research, as opposed to just evaluation of my teaching practice kind of thing. And this particular, so there were three of us, so we divvied up the tasks, and one of them, I went and did the literature search and found a whole bunch of articles, and I sent them to the others, and I had started reading them. The next thing, this draft of a literature review came through from my colleague, one of my colleagues. It's like, whoa, this is impressive. I started reading it, and I thought, it's funny, I read that article, and I didn't take that away from that article at all. So I went back to the article. It's like, no, I didn't say that. And so on. And I discovered he'd written the entire literature review from the abstracts. He had not read a single word of any of the research. Right? It's like, that's bad. But certainly in terms of honours students, I think a lot of people use their research students. So that's one way that, in the absence of having programs that have research honours programs in them, that you don't have that free labour there to kind of jump on. Sometimes it doesn't take a lot of money. It can be. We used to get, if you had taught big classes, you got a certain amount of money for administrative tasks. You know, to do administrative tasks. I would often use that money to get somebody to do a literature search and get the articles for me. Get to mind out that I would do the hard work, but they would actually do the searches and do the search, and they would go and get the stuff ready for me. Sometimes these kind of might highlight some of the key things, make it easier. So I think that becomes a cycle as well. Because what we find, there's a reward for people who perform. So, you know, how do you get that first kick on? I guess is that so? Yeah. So I just using another student sometimes that's the lecture attendance. First one that was actually a long sleep as well. Did. The first study, then we repeated it with the business students as well.
I've been listening to Tom this morning and then some colleague. Let's take a look at a comparison here between our university, and then as compared to a lecturer who is teaching a course in a foreign university like Australia. To me, this is my observation. I think here, when we design the course, I think we look at the subject, we look at the reference, then we get our knowledge, information from the first reference, main reference, and we design it based on our outcome. But I also see that all the research, and I think that is good. I'm seeing some of the stuff that actually doing this as well. It's based on the course they're teaching, and they're doing research based on the subject they're teaching. So they actually add in more information. They add in their own data findings.
Yeah.
And I think when you are actually in that area, it is kind of like they say, spiral.
Yeah.
Because you become an expert in that area. And when you become an expert, the strange thing is you begin to have more questions.
Mhm.
And rather than just following the textbook blindly, this is what I'll just follow and it's okay. This one translate into, but now you begin to, let's say for example, I have some friends here, like how you action, how to you're looking at action research. You're interested in seeing how students learn compared to, students with a certain ability, creative mind, as compared to students who are more accepting of knowledge. Because different students with different discipline, they also have different behavior and attitude. So I think I see that this is actually a bit different, I think, from the answer questions. That's why we find it so hard, because we cannot accept the knowledge. Or else, once you become expert, once you do research, you don't see that you see it as a second nature. You start to have a lot of questions and you start to do your own publication, you start to add in your own body of knowledge. Because I think research is like, I also tell my students, I said, when we are children, we already start doing research. And I also tell my students, I said, you probably do more research during lunchtime. Then in your class, you decide what to eat, you compare data, you go into the apps, 5 best restaurants in. You probably then the teacher review. Yeah, that's what the teacher review. And say, 4.5. Start to analyze the data, read what other people say. And then you start to do all this. Okay, how far is it from my current place? How long does it take me to go there? How much time do I have? You put so much vested interest into something that you're really interested in. Yeah. I think it is not clear, but all the 5 questions just listed is actually we do all the time in anything that we do, from simple as going for lunch to buying an item in Lazada. Yeah, but it's just that I think when it comes to actual academic research, there is this hurdle. We have said that, okay, this is going to be heavy, dry, or fun. But once you turn it around and say fun, the keyword today you mentioned again, what makes it fun? So once you build into that mind frame, that is when you what's I want to find out this. This is exciting. I'm curious. That is.
This is, I'm going, because you raised, and because I know we're
Sorry.
So I'm just going to, but we will continue the conversation. We said for people who are interested, well, it's not that one. It's this. This is the fun, right? How you bring, so this guy here, a friend of mine, Martin Hampus, he's a chemist. And he loves surfing. Now he's, we won't listen to it. Maybe we can get Mark to come in and talk to one of our circles. But he's now, back here. Okay. Stop really. He now is using his chemistry knowledge to design different materials, different shapes of fins in surfboards. He's combined these outside. As you say, you think like a researcher. Like when you accept you are a researcher, and you apply it to your everyday practice, that's self-awareness, that's that noticing about yourself that you're doing it. It's just that simple process applied to a thorny question. So that is the inspiration for this. This became a huge research agenda for him, right? Because he combined his passion, surfing every day, every single day with design things, different things. And his technique is because he can't afford to go and collect data, and someone who doesn't have time for that. So he has some kind of GPS monitor. And so the data just comes in from the GPS monitor and, you know, a lot of, in terms of speed, and, you know, all of those kinds of things that he needs for his research. And my Scrabble research was the same thing, because there are a few things that as becoming, that's from one of the world championships that board. But thinking about Scrabble, which I did so that I would stop working 7 days a week on my university work, I took up Scrabble in a club and, you know, then got involved in directing all of these high-powered World Scrabble Championships. But there are a few things that, because of my science background, is how do you become really good at it? How do you become an expert in Scrabble? Right? You would think that people that were that like words would be really good in Scrabble. No, the best Scrabblers are mathematicians that have mathematical skills. Right? It's the patterns. They learn words as patterns. Right? They have the probabilities. They know how to maximize. They know about rate balance. They, you know, all of the techniques of being top in. So, I mean, that's one of the things. The #1 Scrabbler in the world lives in Malaysia. He's actually New Zealander by birth, but he lives in Malaysia, and so on. He doesn't speak French. He won the French World Championships because he studied the dictionary. He doesn't know what any of the meanings are. Right? He just studied the words. The French. So the other question, because people kept asking me, well, you know, sort of like, how do you get to be good at it? And the other thing that I reflected on when I went to all of these World Scrabble Championships, if I went to a club to be mainly women of a certain age, right? World Championships, young men, dominated by men. A woman has never won the World Scrabble Championship. 3 times have won the English World Scrabble Championships. 3 people from Thailand. Never been won by women. The Nigerians are very good. The Malaysians are good. The Singaporeans are good. The Thai are very, very good. And so on. And it's, yeah, so understanding that expertise. You say, well, okay, you can start with that question of gender. Why is there a gender difference? And there's that association, because it's not just about how it's taught, because it's a word game, and this is supposed to be where women are stronger, right? And someone else, women aren't as competitive. Believe me, any woman that is in a Scrabble club, they're competitive. They want to win. They want to. So there's no. The time. You have to devote a lot of time to studying, and you have to do the right kind of studying. So there's, you know, there's just so much, you know, so many questions, so many potentials. So that's some work that I've done as well. And I think we'll leave it from there, but through Lou, we'll coordinate, we'll set up something, work out best time. You know, we can do this, and I still have, I have one appointment at 10 o'clock tomorrow. So the time slot I have is 10 to 12.
Yeah,
Right?
and as well, what we can do is we will use this room. So we will have the first appointment here, and subsequently any new appointments, maybe here and so on, just usher them here, and then we'll meet.
Okay. Awesome. And if you can't fit into that schedule, I've got some business cards. I mean, you all know where I'm from and how to get in touch with me, but if anybody wants to take a business card. You're going to run out here, I know. I've got 2 left. Okay, I might need a couple of these on Thursday night. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. It's just been such fun.
We were
Yeah.
Pagi ini cuaca